And at least one American, Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, agrees that the U.S., not Saddam Hussein, is to blame for the suffering of the Iraqi people.
And frankly, it ain't none of your business. What have you got to say about it? Did you teach Malcolm? Did you make Malcolm? Did you clean up Malcolm? Did you put Malcolm out before the world? Was Malcolm your traitor or was he ours? And if we dealt with it like a nation deals with a traitor, what the hell business is it of yours?
Just listen to yourself. Listen to your deranged and wild and, quite frankly, savage self. To think that you, a so-called religious leader, could vituperate against Malcolm X in that despicable fashion. And to the best of my knowledge, you have never apologized for the vicious words that you spoke in that horrific, monstrous, disgusting speech that you gave in 1993. Never apologized for them. And yet you call upon everybody else to atone and to reconcile. And yet a speech like this, which is still in circulation in the world, not a word of apology from you about the viciousness that you spoke against Malcolm X.
Or black person, no Jewish child. You have never seen Farrakhan say one thing about harming Jewish people or white people or any people.
Now, during the course of your speech, Mr. Farrakhan, you leveled a defamatory charge at the late Dr. Betty Shabazz. A vicious and despicable lie. Take a listen to yourself.
But the hurting thing is, 2 innocent men went to prison for 25 years of their life. And they were sentenced to a prison term that they didn't deserve by the mouth of Betty Shabazz. Betty was so hurt at the death of her husband. Being in the marsh, she knew Thomas Johnson and Norman Butler, and she placed them at the scene of the crime when they were not there.
According to you, Dr. Betty Shabazz is responsible for the wrongful imprisonment of Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson, according to you. Now, according to The Death and Life of Malcolm X by Peter Goldman and Michael Friedley's Malcolm X, The Assassination, and the accounts of the 1966 assassination trial that they both contain, according to both books and according to the transcripts of the trial, when the late Dr. Betty Shabazz took the witness stand to testify about what had transpired on the 21st of February of '65 in the Audubon Ballroom, she wasn't able to identify any of the gunmen who killed her husband. She wasn't able to identify Talmadge Hayer. She wasn't able to identify Norman Butler. She wasn't able to identify Thomas Johnson. This is in the transcripts of the trial. And the judge in the case, the presiding judge, Charles Marks, said as much himself, that Betty did not identify anyone. That Dr. Betty Shabazz did not identify anyone. She did not point to anyone. So your assertion that Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson were sentenced to prison terms they didn't deserve from her mouth was a defamation of Dr. Betty Shabazz. In October of 1998, you appeared on Meet the Press and had this to say.
But I don't think that I should have to apologize unless I am shown that there's something that I said that is untrue, that is not correct. Then I would have no problem whatsoever of going before the world where I made my mistake and correct my mistake and ask for forgiveness.
Apologize for telling a blatant lie against Dr. Betty Shabazz. She was not responsible for the wrongful imprisonment of Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson. The Nation of Islam was, because the Nation of Islam knew from day one the identities of the individuals that Talmadge Hayer later named as his co-assassins. The Nation of Islam has known all along who murdered Malcolm. You withheld that information from the authorities. As such, you, the Nation of Islam, bear full responsibility for the wrongful imprisonment of Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson.
In that scenario, was Malcolm worthy to sit in the seat of Elijah Muhammad and lead and be a redeemer of our people? Wait.
The presentations that you have given on Malcolm X are lies from start to finish. And in the context of those lies, naturally Malcolm X comes out unfavorably. Naturally Malcolm X doesn't look as impressive as you imagine you do. But Malcolm X, I want to say this right to your face, has more character in his toenail and in his little finger than 10,000 Louis Farrakhan's have in their entire being. Malcolm X was a man of the ultimate character. And when, on the 21st of February 1965, his gunmen assembled in front of him to execute him, Malcolm didn't beg for forgiveness. Malcolm didn't plead for his life. He didn't say, please don't kill me. Malcolm said, cool it, brothers, and they murdered him. Even in that split second, Malcolm X displayed a gallantry that you can only dream of.
And been cast into the fiery furnace, a land where they've been making it hot as hell for us for 400 years.
There's a statement, Mr. Farrakhan, that you've attributed to Malcolm X, a statement you claim he made to you in the last ever meeting you had with him.
The last conversation I ever held with Malcolm, we were sitting in his blue Oldsmobile, the same one that's now in Malcolm X College in Chicago. And Malcolm said to me, as God is my witness, he said, Brother Lewis, he said, I wish it was you being an example for me rather than me being an example for you.
Now, with all due respect, Mr. Farrakhan, did Malcolm X ever actually say any such thing? Did any such a silly statement ever actually come out of Malcolm's mouth? Or is that not yet another one of your inventions and blatant fabrications?
The last conversation I had with Malcolm X, he was about to leave the nation. And in that same car, out there, we sat in front of his home in Long Island. And Malcolm looked at me and said these words. He said, brother, I wish that it was you being an example for me rather than me being an example for you.
The idea that he could have intuited that his situation was being an example for you is rubbish. Every single time you are accused of complicity in the murder of Malcolm X, you always deny the accusation by emphasizing what a junior position you held in the Nation of Islam. In fact, in your interview, your 1985 interview with the National Alliance, you have stressed the fact that you didn't have any standing, if you will, within the Nation of Islam to be in any position to have played the role in Malcolm's assassination that you are accused of having played. I have never been investigated for any part or complicity in the assassination of Malcolm X. I've never been mentioned in the early writings on Malcolm's assassination. My name never came up because I was not a major player in the Nation of Islam.
Oh, I don't know Willie Horton. I'm Louis Farrakhan.
So, when you attribute to Malcolm X a statement in which Malcolm appears to somehow predict your future, when you were a person of little or no standing at the time, that right there places a cloud of doubt over the credibility of that particular statement. That Malcolm X would say to you, his understudy, I wish it was you being an example for me rather than me being an example for you. I can't even see how Malcolm could come out with a statement like that. A statement that seems so selfish and self-pitying and so at variance with everything that we know about Malcolm's character.
You make my point.
I mean, what you're basically trying to get us to believe is that Malcolm X was essentially wishing his misfortune on you so that he could benefit from it. You want us to believe that Malcolm X said to you, I wish you had, as it were, fucked up for my benefit, rather than the reverse.
You're not an American. You're an African who happens to be an American.
Malcolm X was a man who assumed responsibility for his actions. He would never come out with a statement that pathetic. Not a man of Malcolm's caliber. And so I'm convinced that the I wish it was you being an example for me rather than me being an example for you is another one of your fabrications. And it's a fabrication designed to fit this theme that you've concocted for your Malcolm X story.
So Malcolm died in reality that I might live. I thank Allah for his life, and I grieve over his death.
In other words, you've conceptualized your relationship with Malcolm in those terms, that Malcolm's life, his alleged mistakes, and his death were somehow preparatory for your own career. So naturally, in the context of that particular conception you have of the relationship between Malcolm's life and your own, Malcolm would have to have said something like, Lewis, I wish it was you being an example for me rather than me being an example for you. It's not only a blatant fabrication, but it comes across like that. It sounds like a made-up statement. I wish it was you being an example for me rather. It's too mechanistic. It's got a Lego-like put together, cobbled together quality. I could be wrong, but I'm probably right.
And he named all the enemies that I would have that were his enemies, and he didn't lie, he knew. Malcolm knew my future before I knew it. And he knew that I would be the one that would replace him. He knew that his life and his death would be an example for me. And if it were not for that example, I'd be dead right now.
Likewise, your claims that Malcolm X somehow told you about who your enemies were going to be in the Nation of Islam is such blatant horseshit. When did you become the national spokesman? When did you assume Malcolm's role? In 1967. When did Malcolm X have this alleged conversation with you? In late 63 or early 64. And yet you want us to believe that Malcolm X predicted who your enemies were going to be once you assumed a role that was still 4 years into the future? I mean, it's only in your capacity as national spokesman that you began to be the focus of this alleged enmity and envy. The idea that Malcolm could have seen that far ahead to tell you who your enemies were going to be is a blatant lie.
God has made me a better man for you than Malcolm X. I'm standing where Malcolm would have stood if he had the character to stand where I'm standing.
God has made you a better man for us than Malcolm X? Are you completely crazy? In what way? Name a single respect, Mr. Farrakhan, in which you represent an improvement on Malcolm. Name one thing. Name one thing you've done that you can in all honesty say would have been beyond Malcolm's ability.
With a vicious spangle.